least, I want to say thanks to Vijayta, Martina, Paulina, and Arturo for accepting to participate and for the contribution, ideas, and the passion that they put in organizing this meeting. Now I want to do just a brief introduction about the topic of our webinar, which is the concept of migration. So the Oxford Dictionary defined migration as the movement of a person or people from one country, locality, place of residence to settle in another. Migration is a normal activity and a changeless feature of our society. People have always traveled from one place to another and will continue to do so for many reasons. The most common motivation is the desire for a better life, a desire sometimes forced by extreme and dramatic circumstances. Migration can be driven by hostile environments in a country, such as war or persecution, or even in a home, as in the case of many refugees and exiles. It can be motivated by the spirit of adventure, but also by work reason, love, friendship. And people migrate between countries, regions, cities, and towns, or even from their families' homes to seek for their independence. There are many types of migrants as there are reasons to move. So migration can be seen from many perspectives. From a micro level, migrants face cultural, economic, social, psychological, and political challenges. And from a macro perspective, migration policies are shaped by, influenced by discourses of internationalization, globalization, post-neocolonialism, nationalism, capitalism. There is also a meso level, which is related to migration management, including all those organizations involved with the movement of people, such as National Reception Center, International Reception Center, civil society organization offering support to migrants, but also employment agency and other kind of businesses. During this webinar, we will look among various forms of migration and type of immigrants, and we will explore diverse critical perspectives on the business of immigration from various geography in the global north and the global south. Now we'll pass the word to Vijayta. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Hi, everyone. I'm Vijayta. Hope you all are doing well and your families and loved ones as well. I'll quickly talk about the Q&A facility that we have as well as the Padlet. So our idea is that we'll be doing a few rounds of discussion among ourselves, but equally importantly, we would like to know your ideas, your views, your experiences as well. Plus, of course, if you have any questions. So we would encourage you to engage with us. If you have a question, please drop your question in the Q&A facility. If you look at like the screen, there are two ways in which you could engage. One is chat, the other one is Q&A. If you have a question, please choose Q&A one. And we have also created a Padlet page, and we would really love to have your views and your experiences. I'm just posting the Padlet link that we have. So in order to share your experiences and ideas with us on the topic of our session today, please use that link. But if you have a question, for that, you can use Q&A. I'm just pasting this Padlet link over here. I hope, oh, I need to select panelists and attendees for that. Okay. All right, yeah. You should have received the link. If you go to the link, we already have two questions over there, and they are the ones with which we'll be engaging today. There's also one miscellaneous column we have put in, just in case your thoughts are, I mean, outside those two questions, you're more than welcome, and we would love to really hear your views. There'll be a plus sign under each of those questions. If you click on that plus sign, it shows a text box where you can enter your thoughts, and once you leave it there, it like everybody, all of us as panelists and attendees can have a look at that. So we encourage you to do that as we go along in the session today. With that, I'll hand it back to Marco. Thank you.
Okay, so we are now going to introduce ourselves. And since we are not native English speakers, I think it is fair that we introduce ourselves in our household language. So I will start and I will introduce myself. So Deo Mizerriu Marco Distinto, zeu sardo e italiano. Eu nasci em Casteddu, e em Casteddu ho studiato psicologia. Em 2016 eu bati in Inghilterra, poi vai sul dottorato a Saupe University, a pus studiaus integrazione des migrantes in Italia.
Dziękuję, Marko. Nazywam się Martyna Nashliva, wychowałam się i studiowałam w Krakowie. W Krakowie nadal mieszka moja rodzina. Do Wielkiej Brytanii przyjechałam na wymianę studencką w 1999 roku do Newcastle. Obecnie mieszkam w Londynie i pracuję na Uniwersytecie w Essex jako profesor zarządzania i organizacji.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Paulina Segarra, soy profesora investigadora en la Ciudad de México, en donde he estado durante los últimos 3 años tras hacer mi doctorado en el Business School del Tecnológico de Monterrey, donde me gradué con una tesis enfocada en migrantes latinos indocumentados en Estados Unidos.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Yo soy Arturo Sorio. Yo soy originalmente de México vía Massachusetts y ahorita vivo en Nueva Jersey. En mi casa, entre mi esposa y yo, que también es profesora, tenemos 4 diferentes nacionalidades y hemos vivido permanentemente en 3 diferentes países. Soy profesor asociado en la Escuela de Negocios en la Universidad de Rutgers. Mis intereses académicos son emprendimiento empresarial en comunidades y resistencia de comunidades y en inmigración. Yo soy un inmigrante.
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम विजेता दोषी है। मेरा जन्म कुल्लू हिमाचल प्रदेश में हुआ है। शिक्षा के लिए हम हिमाचल से चंडीगढ़ गए और मेरी उच्च शिक्षा IIM अहमदाबाद से हुई है। अब मैं उदयपुर में एज एसोसिएट प्रोफेसर काम कर रही हूँ। धन्यवाद।
Okay. So I think that probably not everyone understood what we said. Maybe someone understood some words, but this is exactly our provocation. We just wanted to make you feel and try to understand what it means not to understand in the language of a person who's speaking to you, which is this is one of the most significant challenges of the migrant experience. But all these languages and all this way of speaking, and these are part of our histories and part of who we are, our identities and subjectivities. So now we are going to reintroduce ourselves in English, which is probably the language you're most comfortable to listen to us speaking in terms of, in academia or during the conferences. So my name is Marco Distinto. I'm Sardinian and Italian. I've born in Cagliari. And in Cagliari, I've studied psychology. And then in 2016, I've moved to UK, to Milton Keynes, to do my PhD at the Open University that I finished at the end of last year. And I did a research on the integration of the refugees in Italy.
Thank you, Marco. My name is Martyna Nashliva. I was brought up in Kraków, Poland, and I studied in Kraków, Poland at the University of Economics. I studied international trade and international relations, and my family still live in Kraków. I came to the UK as an exchange student as part of the Erasmus program in 1999. And at present, I work in London, and I work at the University of Essex as a professor of management and organization studies, and I'm a migrant.
Hi, my name is Paulina Segarra, and I am a research professor at Universidad Anáhuac, Mexico, in Mexico City. I was born and raised in Mexico, and well, I have the opportunity to be a migrant when I did my dissertation research in the United States while I was studying undocumented immigrants, and I'm very happy to be with you today.
Hi, I'm Vijeta Doshi. I was born in Kullu, Himachal Pradesh in India, and my schooling has happened from the city of Chandigarh. For my higher education, I moved to Ahmedabad, IIM Ahmedabad, from where I did my PhD. Currently, I work in IIM Udaipur in Rajasthan. So really looking forward to interact with you all. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am Arturo Sorio. I'm originally from Mexico via Massachusetts, currently live in New Jersey. At home, between my wife and me, who is also a professor, we have 4 different citizenships, and we have lived permanently in 3 different countries. I am an associate professor at Rutgers Business School. My academic interests are in business entrepreneurship, in communities, community resilience, immigration, and I am an immigrant.
Okay, thank you to everyone. Now let's begin our conversation. And the first thing that I want to do, that we are going to do, is to dissect the title of our webinar, which is the business of immigration. So as I said earlier, migration is a multidimensional concept, and we can look at it from different perspectives related to specific typologies of migration and migrants. So in our title, we decided to write immigration, not just immigration or migration or emigration. And we took this decision because we wanted to reconcile without excluding many different ways of theorizing the movements of people. So during one of our many conversations, we asked ourselves, do we want to just talk about immigration? So at the end, we wanted to use the word migrants because we wanted to stress the dynamic element of it, of migration, but we also wanted to address the movement of those people traveling to another place to finally settle after an endless and tiring journey. So at the end, we decided to use the parentheses and keep this immigration in order to convey the sense of uncertainty, instability, and precarity that characterize the in-between condition of many migrants and the nomadic way of life. So our interest lays not only in movement in space, for example, from point A to point B, but also to those movements within geographical space, and also symbolical movement in spaces related to identities and encounter between subjectivities, objects, place in different times and different contexts. But now we will be focusing on the first word of the title, which is the business. In my specific case, this word has a particular connotation, actually a bad one, as in Italy, the context of my doctoral research, the phrase the business of migration was used mostly by right-wing anti-immigration movements to reinforce their nationalist agendas and describe in a negative way the work of social cooperatives, NGOs, and civil society organizations supporting migrants' arrival and their integration. So according to such discourse, these organizations were basically profiting by the arrival of the refugees. So at the beginning of my PhD, I remember that I really wanted to criticize the discourse. So this is why I decided to explore the work of Italian refugee reception centers supporting migrants during the process, the path to integration. But what I want to ask to the other speaker is, what does the business of immigration means to you? And what in your research and context is distinct about the business of migration?
Thank you very much, Marco. To me, the word business here relates more than anything else to the business school, business and the business school. And when I think about the business of immigration, to me, it's the question of how does it relate to the business school? And historically, of course, business schools were often established on the basis of existing schools of commerce, schools of trade. So that business element was already there, but there's also that element of exchange, that element of movement. Trade, of course, is associated with movement, both the movement of goods, of course, capital as well, but also the movement of bodies, the movement of people, bodies crossing borders. So the business school, just by that kind of history, and often, of course, business schools were also funded and sponsored by people involved in various forms of trade. So the idea of which also involved the movement of people. So the idea of migration and business and the business school, these things really are very much connected for me. Now, contemporarily, of course, as part of their activities, business schools themselves instigate and generate both business and movements of people. And the people here are, of course, students and staff as like ourselves, and students as, you know, the way most of us here used to be somewhere an international student at some point. And many business schools rely on international students to enroll on their program. So in that sense, they attract that migration, that movement of bodies, at least for a certain period of time, at least for a few years. The UK is the context in which I work and live, the context in which I was once an international student and now I'm an international staff member. So of course, that's the context that I know very well and better than any other context. So here we have, at the moment, we have about 2.4 million students in total, 238 in total, that's statistics for last year in the UK. And of these, nearly 500,000 are international students, are people not from the UK. So that's more than 1/5 of all our students are migrants. And of course, in business schools, this proportion is higher than that. So when we teach our students, we already teach to a population that consists of that kind of mixture of locals and migrants, and that's something that we are, I'm sure, and if we are not, it's worth reminding ourselves about, something we need to be conscious of. Now, what's also very interesting, of course, is that being a migrant student also means one is the kind of migrant who brings money with them. And in that sense, business school is also a business because it generates income. And that's non-trivial because in many contexts, including the UK context, the migrant student, the non-national student, is the one who is expected to pay more money in order to fuel that business. So they fuel the business of migration in total, but also the business of the business school. Now, in business school context, again, that fee issue and that transactional issue is quite pronounced, because many business school programs are exactly designed to respond to the needs, to potential demand from that international market, which is how our students are often referred to. Now, again, when we now move to talking about staff in UK higher education, around, again, there's the relatively recent statistics will tell us 32% of all staff, academic staff in business schools are of non-UK nationality, 32%, 1/3. Again, in the case of business schools, this proportion is actually often higher than across the whole context. And international staff are the migrants who relocate. And an interesting thing you mentioned, Marco, when you discussed the definition of migration, is that migration is about this kind of permanent relocation as opposed to a temporary stay. As Arturo told us earlier, he and his partner have already lived permanently in 3 countries. So when does somebody's stay as a migrant begin and the stay as a temporary sojourner end? I don't know, but that's one of the things obviously to discuss when we discuss migration. But business schools, I believe that because of the number of students that they cater for who are international, and because of the proportion of international staff, are really important context in which to study migration, especially as both staff and student in the academic context will encounter the sort of experiences that the migrants encounter everywhere. Let's be conscious of that as well. The university, the business school, is a social unit. It's not outside the societal structure. So actually studying business schools and international staff or international students in business school is a way of studying migration and society as well, because it's not different. It's part of the overall migration phenomenon. Now, both in my own past and current research, I have studied the experiences and careers of academic staff in business schools and the implications of the presence of those groups of staff for organizational hierarchies and power relations. In the past, there was a research project that I worked on with another colleague where the focus was explicitly on international staff in business schools, so you could say migrant staff in business schools. At present, I'm working on another project that explores the experiences of staff in business schools from specifically from an equality, diversity, and inclusivity perspective. So, and then again, some participants are UK-born staff, some are non-UK-born academics. And again, it's very interesting in comparing the experiences, the stories, the career trajectories that participants share with us, to learn about whether there is such a thing as a migrant experience in a business school when you are an academic. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. For me, and I want to talk a little bit from my personal perspective as an immigrant and as well as an academic. I want to bring the issue of immigration as a political view, as a movement of bodies and exchanges that they are positive and negative in connotations. So my thoughts are meant to bring some provocations, and they are part of a reflection born from my identity as an immigrant in the context of the pandemic and my research on community resilience. So let's start from the very basic. Labor. Labor is defined as work, especially hard physical work. Better yet, if we look into the Webster Dictionary, it defines labor as the exert of one's powers of body and mind, especially with a painful and strenuous effort. Painful and strenuous effort. When we talk about immigration, we talk about immigrant labor. We're talking about people coming to do painful and strenuous efforts for us and in our context. In business, we conceptualize labor, we talk about work, and we tend to turn a blind eye to what it means. On the everyday activities, on our surroundings, we glorify to be busy. We brag about being very tired because of the work that we do. And we forget that this is not normal. And because we forget that this is not normal, we project this idea of extreme effort, extreme work into people who's around us. And we take it to the next level to people who might be vulnerable to these conditions. Those are the immigrant labor. And I want to pay attention to this space because when you are engaged in this strenuous, strong, extreme work, you may not have time to reflect what it means. You may not have time to speak for yourselves. And I consider that our obligation as a critical scholars and as immigrant, many of us, is to give a voice to those who are voiceless. So what does it mean? What does it phrase this? Well, in the context of immigration, I want to start from what it means to me and move it towards research. For me, I started as an Hispanic moving into the US, and Hispanics in the US oftentimes are linked to labor, small jobs, menial jobs, strong jobs. I have been thought of, conceptualized, and addressed as a temporal labor, as an immigrant. I have gone to the store to buy supplies for my house, and I've been asked how much I charge for the hour of labor. So there's this issue of identity and labor that we take for granted. When we take it to the next level, when we put it in the context of the pandemic, we pay attention into what does it mean to be a temporal immigrant worker, somebody who is expected to live. I made a point on my introduction to talk about being permanent in 3 countries because every time that we move, we think of this place as this is the place where we're going to stay. However, even though when that is our mentality, that has not always been the case. And in the next level, there's people who come to a country under the legal expectation of living after a task is performed, a period has elapsed, or the need for the work is no longer there. These are temporal immigrant workers. These are people who tend to be more vulnerable. And in the context of the pandemic, these were the frontline workers to survival. This has been the people who we put on the front lines. This is the people who we consider to be essential workers that we send to the fields. These are essential workers that manufacture food. These are the essential workers that they are the nurses, the physicians who are at the hospitals. The work that they do put them at risk. And to control this, we look at them and we control their actions. In general, temporal workers have several areas that they are more vulnerable. One is the societal space. The other one is the living and working environment, the healthcare access, and the policy and regulations. In societal space, they are subject to language, xenophobia, oppression, persecution, isolation, invisibility. When we talk about living and working conditions, we put them at risk. We tell them that if they don't work, they will be suspended, and suspension means deportation. So we put their well-being contingent to their ability to perform a work. A resident of the area can go to a hospital if they are sick. A temporary immigrant worker, if they get sick, they get deported. They are disposable. Their labor is necessary, their identity is not. When we talk about policy and regulations, we control, as Martina mentioned, what can they study? Where can they be? Where do they go? So a temporal worker oftentimes is performing as a slave. So we don't think of them in that manner, but temporal workers, individuals who are subject to control of movement, labor, action, speak, who have no rights and can be persecuted for raising their voice, they are, for all practical purposes, modern day slavery. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Arturo, because this makes a lot of sense with what I'm about to tell you about. Well, the United States have long benefited from undocumented immigrants coming to the US and performing cheap labor, dirty work, being invisible. So I think this is a very important context, which we have long observed, but we haven't really heard the voices of those immigrants a lot of times, really reflecting on their experience, what they think, what they believe, why they're there. I mean, obviously because of money, but why did they go? What was going on at their homes? So that was my project. So I will tell you a little bit about my research context. And of course, immigrants in this very particular space are needed, but certainly not wanted and not treated well. So in fact, when we were preparing this talk, Arturo mentioned how a lot of immigrants didn't cross the border crossed them when we lost all this territory to California and California and Texas territory to the United States in the 19th century. So for my data collection, I did this in Southern California, and it was a very peculiar point in time because I did it from September 2016 through May 2017. So there was this whole Trump rhetoric going around. People were very afraid. And of course, immigrants knew that if he got elected, they would be in a further precarious position. So they were already very concerned, and they even described the United States as a golden cage. There were a place that was much better than countries, but it was, some with Trump, they were already like more. So I can got elected. I had already been in California. That day particularly, I was in Los Angeles, and it was the quietest day I experienced in my 9 months there. People were absolutely shocked. They couldn't believe it. I was volunteering at the time and working, of course, with mostly undocumented immigrants, pack their things and go back to their countries. They didn't know they were still going to be sort of welcome at their jobs. So it was, as I said, a very particular time. So Know Your Rights courses were developed. We would give out Know Your Rights cards, just like this. So this pretty much states, I don't have to talk to you if I don't want to. So it's in Spanish, it's in English. They needed to have a lawyer ready in case they were captured by the ICE officers. They already had to have spoken to a lawyer. So it was very, very tense. So as I said, I was volunteering at a church, and I had a very, very unforgettable experience of protesting alongside them. But again, as I will tell you on our next round, I wasn't really part of them. So even when I believed in their cause and I was with them, I wasn't doing this dirty work that they were doing. Of course, I did it a few times for my research, but it wasn't the same position. I wasn't afraid of an ICE officer coming to my door and taking me. So that put us in different places. And once I attended a church talk, and they were discussing how they could help undocumented immigrants, what they could do for them. And there, one of the priests talked about a biblical passage. which reads, "There is neither Jew or Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ." And since then, I realized that this is a commonly cited passage when talking about racism and gender. But at that point, it was undocumented immigrants are in a very peculiar position in which they are neither free nor slaves. They're not really considered slaves because they're not being treated as such, but they're not free to come and go like any other worker who is there. So how dirty work operated, how they were constantly victims of wage theft, and how there was one particular man when we were going to a loving event in Sacramento who said, here they don't want us, and there, back in their home countries, they have forgotten about us. And I thought that was very sad and shocking, but he got it right. People in their home countries don't really think about migrants, people who have left. And they might feel, of course, all these jobs that other people might not want to do. And I know this is not new, but I think that the interesting about this angle was a researcher being able to go with them, protest with them, visit their homes, volunteer at the church, interview them, interview day laborers while sitting on a sidewalk at parking lots. And that allowed me to understand why they were there, what they thought about their own positions, because they were occupying, as I said, a very particular place at a very peculiar time. Of course, they are quiet performers. And of course, what I'm trying to do with all these projects is to give them a voice. So I think that's a very important context to keep.
Thank you, Paulina. So in my context, migration, basically, I'm going to talk about within country migration, which is very relevant for, I would say, many countries in the global south. Many of us would have heard and read about articles on lockdown, migrant workers, reverse migration, wherein these migrants are leaving cities and going back to their homes or to the villages where they've come from in India. And basically, the pandemic seemed like it has exposed the precarity of these migrant workers. Now, migrant workers in India, they work in various sectors. The reverse migration that many of us saw in the articles during the pandemic, many of them worked in construction industry, many of them worked in manufacturing sector, or as domestic help in more informal sectors that way. So I just want to bring your attention to this within country migration, especially from rural to urban places. Because the study that I did was on migrant workers who work in shopping malls. So the business in that sense over there meant these organizations that employ these migrant workers who benefit them in their businesses. But at the same time, the subtle exploitation that happens of these migrant workers. And at the same time, what I found really interesting was this stark contrast of these so-called signifiers of modernity and development in India, which are our shopping malls, and these people who have come for these so-called urban dreams. For them, coming to city itself is like an achievement, and which in fact makes this vicious cycle wherein they are satisfied with too less, or maybe they don't even see the exploitation that's happening. So why many of them migrated was they wanted work. They migrated for education, some of them, and definitely all of them for better lifestyle. But at the same time, many of them struggle both in their workplace as well as adjusting to this city life, which they had actually come to foreseeing a brighter future Whereas over here, when they come, both in their personal lives, in the communities where they live, as well as where they work, the kind of struggles they go through, especially talking about the workplace that they work in. The habitus that they possess, which is that of a rural, the rural habitus that they have in terms of their body language, clothing, confidence level, not being able to speak in English with the customers. All of that somewhere makes them feel they are not at par, both with other workers who are working with them, but are not migrants, as well as definitely the customers. And then there comes other layers and intersectionality issues, such as those of class and gender. But definitely how their migrant identity, it gets very salient in these conditions, these situations, was very evident. But like I said, being able to work in the city, being able to share this with their acquaintances in the village itself seemed like a big growth or progress to them, which somewhere propelled this cycle of still continuing and not wanting to return back. Many of them said they don't want to go back, whereas they realize what they could earn living in the villages might be more. But still, this idea that, okay, I'm working in mall, this high class place, I'm living in city, my family lives in city, that itself was seen as somewhere a trap, a kind of trap for them. So yeah, that's what I had to say about this business of migration, as well as the study. Yeah. Thanks, Marco. Yeah.
Thanks to everyone. I mean, it appears very clearly how we have all different perspective and interest of research, and that we can see this business of migration from many points of view. And one thing that just came to my mind is this, maybe something that can be interesting to do is just like to challenge the conception of migrants as a lack of stability, but actually the movement, from what you said, all of you said, is just kind of an important thing in terms for the economy, for the business of a society. And also that we should maybe challenge the idea of migration as just an unfortunate phenomenon, because actually what it comes from, what appears is that migration actually is kind of a productive foundation of something that we consider stable, which is the society, but actually which is based on migration. And actually society needs migrants to survive to some extent. Moreover, if you understand migration and movement of people as just a lack of stability, we are also kind of accepting the banality of those micro forms of dispossessions and exploitation that actually are hidden and preserve our privileged position as static. So we need the movement of others in order to keep the society as a stable place. And I'm just thinking about what happened during the pandemic with the migrants in the food sector. That basically the movement where there was a restraint in movements, and then the food supply chain was kind of suffering for the lack of migrants. And as I was saying before, it is quite clear that we have different research perspectives related to the business of migration, but also, as we said at the beginning, that we are all migrants. We also have different stories about how and why we started to do research on migrants and migration, or even how about why we start researching migrants and migration, how this influenced the way we see ourselves. So, for example, in my case, when I decided that I wanted to focus my research on the integration of the refugees in Italy, I had to reflect on my experience as a Sardinian moving to the UK, which are places that are completely different to some extent and for so many aspects. So I started questioning myself about being more or less integrated, and how this physical movement that I did was also moving me as a person, as a whole person. So as the time passed and I was going with my research, and I was analyzing my data, and the method that I choose for my research, which were post-qualitative methods, helped me to self-reflect about my position in a new way. So I was kind of deterritorializing my subjectivity. I was kind of moving myself in the space, and both geographical and also space, identity space. And I realized that I was becoming a migrant and also a nomad in terms of I was always moving. I was traveling every month. So at the there was a moment during my research. I was finishing my research. I was analyzing data for a paper that I was writing, and it was just the beginning of the pandemic. And in that moment, while I was conducting my research, I really became aware of my in-between condition and the precarity of my position. So I kind of felt weak because I couldn't travel anymore while I was traveling every month to meet my family and to meet my friends. And I really felt the kind of like the geographical distance and that sense of displacement, the inner displacement that I couldn't have experienced before because I was traveling. I was free to travel every month. So I was really kind of a nomad, but I was also kind of a migrant that was able to travel whenever he wanted. I was kind of privileged in my position. So I was reading the data in that particular moment. I start to see everything, the data in a different way. And not only I felt closer to the research participant, but also encountered new parts of me. So I was just thinking that I felt really what Julia Kristeva used to say when she said that we had to meet, in order to meet the migrants, we have to meet the stranger in myself, the stranger in ourselves, or even the stranger to ourselves. So just starting from this reflection, I just wanted to ask you how your being a migrant affected your research, or how your research affected your being a migrant.
Thank you very much, Marco. In my case, the first research project which I was involved in, and that was 15 years ago now, was focusing on Polish migrants in the UK. So of course I was studying people who were in a similar situation to me. That first project wasn't about academics. These were people that I was able to conduct interviews with in Polish. I was able to find research participants through my own personal networks, and I was also able to establish rapport with them in the interview setting because of being a Polish person in the UK, speaking the language, knowing people that they knew, etc., etc. Now, for another project, the one which I was researching, where I was researching business school academics who were international academics, I was also able to connect to the research participants because I was an academic, I was an international member of staff, and I worked together with a colleague who was also an international member of staff, and we were able to jointly make sense of the data, of what the participants were telling us, interpret the data. I have also drawn on intersectionality in my research from a theoretical perspective because I was particularly interested in how the intersection of gender and nationality or foreignness produces various outcomes for people in terms of their career progression, for example. So obviously my own situation influenced the choice of topics and also the way I conducted the research, the theoretical frame that I was using. Another aspect, which is in my case very important, is how functioning professionally in a language which isn't my first language has also influenced my choice of theory. So, for example, I drew from social linguistics and linguistic psychology in my research to understand the consequences of speaking with a foreign accent, because that was another aspect of migrant experience that was crucial in my case, and then something that I wanted to research myself as well. Now, both the literature that I have read and the empirical work that I have conducted also changed me. And I must say that reflecting on how being a migrant has influenced my research is easier for me probably than to say how my research has influenced me in making sense of the migration experience. Because I think when I was researching migration for many years, I was very much in denial about my own status as a migrant. I didn't see myself as a migrant. I didn't come to the UK for economic reasons. I came as a student, and it seemed obvious. I wanted to do a PhD in the UK. I wanted to work in the UK more as a kind of logical progression from the PhD. So I didn't see myself as a migrant. And it was as I continued speaking to people who shared their story, as I kept reading the literature, as I was paying attention to the context in which I was conducting the research and developing my own career, I started to realize, actually, no, I'm not some sort of an expat or a student and academic who happens to be from a different country. I'm actually a migrant, and that realization happened gradually, and the realization that actually it doesn't matter whether my motivations for coming to the UK in the first place were economically driven or not. As you when you mentioned that definition initially, Marco, you spoke about a hope of a better life. I was a student. I don't know. I had a hope for a better life. I had a hope for a good time as a student away from home in a different country. But then it finally got to me that what matters, it does matter that I was born in a different country, that I do speak with a foreign accent, that the way I look, the way I speak, even my name, this weird Martina with a Y, and this is the Sliva or Sliwa, or is it Silva? What is it? You know, all of this says migrant, and it does influence how people see me, how people, what judgments people make about me, but also, of course, my whole life history and the migration experience influences how I see the world, how I see others, how I interpret what happens to me. And all of this is really influenced by that position of being a migrant. But I guess maybe as a slow learner, it's taken a number of years of studying people who are in international staff or who are migrants before actually really understand and in a way get out of that denial, accept that situation, which is really my own situation. So the former came sooner than the latter. Thanks.
Oh, well, thank you. And for me, Martina, was a similar issue. I did not see myself as an immigrant. I did not thought myself as an immigrant. I was other by the context to become an immigrant. Let me give you a small transition of what it meant. When I moved into the US, I moved because I was brought as a temporal management position to work. After a while, I quit my job and I went back to school. So like in your case, I wasn't a student. However, the student that I was in the space that I was at UMass Amherst, Western Massachusetts. For those of you who don't know the space, this is a community university town. If you live there and you don't have an if you live there and you have an American accent, you are likely to be low skill work, staff at the university, or worker on the farms. If you have an accent, you are a foreigner student, a visiting scholar. So it was a different identity of power. I graduated, moved to New Jersey, and as some people in the Padlet already mentioned, I became a different person. I became a different type of immigrant. My driver license for many years in New Jersey, if you were on a visa, my driver license will need to be renewed every year. And there was a label on my driver license in red bold letters that says temporal visa. I will have to get a good behavior letter from my university to get my driver license renewed. My teaching evaluations, I was fearful of them because they were to some degree tied to my ability to live in the country. If several students didn't like me, my teaching evaluation will go down. There might not be a renewal on my contract and I could be deported. So this started to give me a different understanding of what it meant to be an immigrant. And that was as well connected to seeing lots of Hispanic immigrant students in the classroom who were secret about their identity because they thought that it was kind of a stigma in the context in this context. So it took me conversations with people in the community to understand that there was power to be an immigrant and there was an identity to be an immigrant. My work then moved in the same context of community resilience, entrepreneurship. It moved into a different space. It moved into the space of the immigrant entrepreneur, and my concept of network, of community, moved from this geographically bound group of people into this global network of flows. So my most recent work is about international flows. So how do people move money to support businesses, and how the local immigrants can become residents, at which point we stop being immigrants, at what point we stop being the other and we become we. And that is not about the number of people, but it is about how we integrate in the space. So my research has been looking at it, and something that was brought to my attention as well through the pandemic is that we are happy to be in this space. We don't question who we are when we're in this space, but we may be living through the consequence of who we are in the space. The most difficult moments are not when people make a point about who we are, but when people don't understand who we are, when people see immigration and they don't see the differences. In the most simple term, doing research on immigration means that my computer has to have multiple dictionaries loaded, that every time that I open, I see the smiles from the panel, every time that I open an email, I have to change the language because it may mark everything as a misspell. When you talk about when you open your browser, it jumps in different languages. When you try to talk to people, people will switch languages on you and they will not know how to address you because they don't know who you are. So even when you are an immigrant, you are not an immigrant. And when you have your clock, you have to have different time zones operating because you are working with different people. So being an immigrant is accepting that you flow in a temporal space, that you flow in a cultural context. And my last comment is, when I truly understood what I was when I went back home. I visit Mexico to be with my family. And notice my choice of words. I visit Mexico instead of I went home. I visit Mexico, and at the neighborhood where I grew up, walk into a store, and the person who greeted me asked me, "Where do you visit us from?" At that moment, I understood that being an immigrant is not living outside of your home, but sometimes means that you no longer have a home. Thank you.
Well, I will tell you now about me being an immigrant while collecting my data. That was a very peculiar experience. I was in this very particular situation in which I was sort of an insider because I was born and raised in Mexico and I speak Spanish, but I was an outsider, really. I found out that I couldn't fully relate to my informant's experiences because, I mean, to be fair, I have experienced a very privileged life. I was there on a valid visa, and that put me in a different position. But of course, when I arrived to Southern California, I was like, I'm one of them. And then I will tell you about how I realized that this wasn't really it. And just like Martina mentioned, I didn't see myself as a migrant in this community at first. And it took a while to realize that I really was. So when I went there, I really wanted immigrants to perceive me as a member of the community. So I initially tried to do with steps like dressing down, dyeing my hair darker. I mean, at that time I was really blonde, so I was trying to kind of look like them. And I didn't realize that there were a lot of other nuances that other Latino people were going to quickly pick up, the accent, the experiences. And when I would tell them I was a researcher, and when they asked me where I went to school, the first response that they would give me was, that's a very expensive school. And that would immediately put me in a different position. Even if I explained, I'm on a scholarship, I really don't pay for this PhD program, that didn't matter. They were like, you're part of this school, that means you're privileged, you're in a different position than the one we're in. So that made me different out of the bat. So I was completely out of my depth when I was trying to speak to day laborers at parking lots and at the church. And they would even find it kind of funny, and they would give me a little bit of trouble in that sense. In fact, once I found a day laborer sitting on a fence, which was about 2 meters high, and I asked him if I could interview him, and he said, of course, if you come and sit with me. And I was like, of course I will sit with you. So I don't know how. I climbed the fence, I sat with him, we had the interview. Never mind, I felt like Humpty Dumpty for the 45 minutes I was sitting there. But I was in their territory. I was outside my environment. I was outside from home. And even when I felt I was like with my people, Latin people, this was very, very noticeable for them that I wasn't one of them. So when I was there, it would also shock me to learn that other Latinos would do horrible things to undocumented immigrants. I had imagined that this came from other nationalities, maybe from people who were legally in the country, but I found quickly that this wasn't always the case. So there's a paper that I've published with my supervisor, and we tell the story of this immigrant woman who told me how she was a painter with her brother. They painted houses, and one week they were working in a house, and the last day they would come, finish the last details, collect their money. And when they knocked the door to just pretty much do that the last day, the person there just pretended not to know them. When they told me these stories, I was, how? How do you do this to someone else who is in a precarious position as you are? Yet I found this abuse. And it struck me also when day laborers would actually say, and I quote them, a man told me, they think we're beasts. And I thought this was a very, very unfair treatment, but that's how they felt. So this experience made me reflect on my own position as a researcher. And of course, it made me question who I was in that space. And this realization took a few weeks, but it came a very particular afternoon. I was working at the church. And we were stapling raffle tickets. So I was there, and I was doing this with a man who would come to the church very often. I had met him a few weeks before that. I had already interviewed him, so I knew a little bit about his hard life back in Mexico. He was an undocumented immigrant. He was homeless at the time. He was struggling with addiction, and he had attempted to commit suicide a few weeks before I met him. So he would hang out at the church, doing small things, waiting for a meal, keeping himself busy. So while we were doing that, all of a sudden I got a message from my mom, and it was a photo of my dog. So it was this beautiful Dalmatian. She was in a bed covered and all, and I didn't give it a second thought. I turned to this guy and I'm like, look, this is my dog. So she's really cute. And he gives me a half smile and he says, your dog has a better bed than me. I didn't know if I should hide under the desk. I didn't know what I could do at that moment. I was really, really embarrassed. I know he didn't mean to embarrass me, but that's when it hit me. I was like, yes, we're not in the same position. And of course, I was in a very embarrassing moment at the time, but if I hadn't realized my privilege before, that did it. So this research project told me a lot about myself, and I became more appreciative about the struggles of my informants and what I thought about their lives. So what I'm trying to do, and what I've tried to do, is to do something, albeit modest, by telling their stories and hoping that this would allow for other people to realize that those migrants deserve better, that people in other countries of origin deserve better, so that they don't have to go and put themselves in such precarious positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Quite similar to what Martina and Paulina said, when I was doing my research project, Neither was my own migrant identity. I wasn't aware of that. Nor was migration or migrants was the focus of my project. I had gone to the field wanting to study gender in the experiences of these retail workers. But as I started spending more time in the field, talking to these people, observing them, I realized that there was something more complex going on. And that's when their migrant identity became salient. And simultaneously, my own migrant identity was becoming salient. And I mean, many past experiences, which I didn't think were kind of this, now they were making more sense to me. So the way this research affected me was it made me more aware of my own migrant identity, as well as embracing that. At the same time, I would like to acknowledge, like I think Paulina said about the class privilege. Despite being migrants, just like these workers, definitely I had a class privilege of having had good education, the way I've been brought up, the kind of job I do, and I did acknowledge that part of it. But then this gender, class, migrant identity, all of this was becoming very complex, and that's where I thought intersectionality theory was of great help. But at the same time, it just made me wonder that how, as gender scholar, um, I used to look at gender plus then something else. Whereas now it felt like that plus something else might be in fact a more stronger identity for someone in certain situation. And again, those reflexive thoughts of I mean, what kind of questions, what should ask, what kind of interactions you have with the field when you go to the field, and the kind of realizations you had. So I definitely, I mean, my research that way affected me and my migrant identity. At the same time, after I was having these realization, what I thought was my migrant identity was also influencing my research. In the sense, at least during the data collection, when I would talk to these people, because of my looks, they would clearly see that, okay, even I am out of this context. They would see me as equally foreigner to this context, which somewhere helped build this rapport, looking at the vulnerabilities we shared, not being from the place where you are interviewing, even you come from somewhere else. And like Arturo said, even in like real personal day-to-day experiences, when you get asked whether you are an Indian, right, or whether you come from some state in Northeast, again, these pieces and the way I was making sense of them, it was becoming more clearer to me. So that's how I would say it was a more recursive relationship between my research and my research identity, and at the same time, how my research identity impacted my research. Yeah, that's what I would say, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, your stories were kind of amazing in terms of the differences and all the different experiences, and the way you understood migration in a different way, and the way this influenced your identities, and the way you approach your research, and how we changed your research. And there was something that really, again, came to my mind, and it's still related to what we were saying before, and the fact that actually it is clear that migration is not just a movement of bodies, but also kind of a movement of knowledge. And also migration is also knowledge in movement. And so how this construction of identities and belongings, how they change depending on the context and the condition of exploitation and the condition of privilege. And so something that came to my mind, and maybe something that we can kind of address in terms as researchers, is kind of trying to go against epistemologies that kind of static epistemologies that kind of transform migration only into something that is stable. So as I was saying before, migration is an unfortunate circumstance. So if we see the migrant, the figure of the migrant, if we go beyond the figure of the migrant as just a normative political concept, identifying the condition by which these people are expelled or dispossessed as a result or as the cause of the mobility, maybe we can use the movement, the migrant as the political figure of movement, something in order to challenge the conception of the society that we have. And this can also relate to methodologies, and so methodologies that are able to kind of attest, kind of see the movement of this level of movement. So I was thinking, if we think about studying organization and management by changing, by replacing the idea of the citizen and the stability, and we start thinking about business, societies, organization, using the migrant as the center of our theories, what can happen to our research? We replace the stability of the citizens and we start putting the migrant as the center of the research, at the center of our studies. I mean, I think that this can be, I don't know how you feel about that. What do you think, if you want to add something on this? But I think that this may be kind of I don't know, I was inspired by your words and this is something that came to my mind. And while if you want to add something to this, maybe we can wait for the attendees if they want to add some questions, because so far I've seen just one question. So if you want to add something on this idea, or if you have something else that maybe can be added to my talks, Vijayta, Martina, Arturo, everyone.
If you want, I can speak a little bit about the question that is there, and we can move the conversation. There's a couple of things. This question is asking, what does color identity has to do with migration? So I can tell you from my perspective, I consider myself what I call a comfortable immigrant. Because my skin color looks very similar to people around me. They don't see me as an immigrant until I speak. So my identity of immigrant is not about what do I look like, but how do I been seen to look like. So I could look the same, have a different accent, and I will be considered different. There are different accents that are considered to be more educated. So going back to my original reflection on what it meant to be an immigrant when I was in grad school in a community town education space versus what it is to be an immigrant in a space where people with my accent is hired by the hour to move stones in a garden. So this is not only about how do I look like, but how people perceive my proper space to be at. So there's this, as it's been mentioned by Vijara, by Martina, by Paulina, there is a hierarchy of power where immigrants belong to a different strata. And when you break that dimension, you question the social order and you make society uncomfortable. So it's not only when you have a different skin color, that might be an issue, but if you live in a space where everybody has your same skin color, is not how you look like, but what you represent to them. At least that has been my personal experience.
Yeah, Marco, if I could engage with that question. So Professor Bobby Banerjee has asked, I mean, he says it's a comment as well as a question, that there is, of course, the problem of the color of migration. Migrant experiences vary dramatically depending on whether the migrant is black or white, or brown or white. Add to that Islamophobia to further problematize the category of migrant. And I can't agree more with this comment. Again, I mean, and that's where I was saying intersectionality comes across as a very powerful theoretical framework, wherein the way we were saying that despite being migrant, there may be hierarchy within this identity. And likewise, whether it's about black, brown, or white, how those hierarchies may be placed. At the same time, adding to this complexity, if you add religion or you add caste or you add class or gender, it becomes more complex. So rather than answering, I would say I totally agree with the view that has been expressed. Yeah, thank you for that.
Should we pick another question? We have, I think it's in the comments instead. I think it has been moved. Okay, Sibel is asking, it was very nice to hear personal experiences of you as being a migrant. Are you considering, or have you already considered to use these experiences as the empirical data to present an autobiographical analysis in the context of migration, migrant identity, flow, belongingness, and researcher or scholars? Vijeta, do you want to add something related to what happened after this meeting, after our encounter? I think this can be the moment to say, because if they're asking if we are proposing, if we are preparing a paper, I think we are also preparing something more. I think it can be a right moment to.
Right. Thanks, Marco, and thanks, Sibel, for that question. So our idea was this, like all of us, when we were undergoing multiple meetings for this session, we were thinking that, having this Padlet would mean that even participants like you all would share your experiences. And that would just enrich. For example, Professor Bobby Banerjee has talked about Islamophobia. That would just enrich, and it completely aligns with our idea of this migration, wherein we are saying it is an ongoing, a fluid process. It is movement. And we were thinking that if we could, all of us, engage with Padlet right now, and maybe even later, that would be a great idea. And that will just put together the various pieces of this seminar. So that's something we were thinking. In terms of whether we are wanting to use this in a paper, I mean, it's for us to discuss, if that's what you meant, Sibel, saying that are we planning to use this as empirical data to present our autobiographical analysis? That's something we could take the discussion forward about. But that was the idea primarily of the Padlet, that how we could also know you all. Or if at all the discussion that we do somewhere, maybe the migrant identity you might have that becomes salient, you're able to relate to the conversation we are having, might be good to put that up there. So I was looking at the Padlet, and very beautifully somebody has written about being colorblind, that until that situation in which that person was in, the person was colorblind, and how sometimes we are like migration blind. At least I was before I was doing this research, and how then this research helped come about that realization. But like what I'm trying to say is Padlet, if that brings this point within the discussion, we thought that would be very meaningful to have your thoughts that way. Yeah, Marco, you want to add something to that?
I was also reading the comments on the Padlets, and really the comments, this one that you were just mentioning about being colorblind. I mean, it's something. Of course, my experience is different because I moved from Italy to the UK, so I never had this kind of experience. So I mean, it's just maybe more than colorblind in my case. It was just maybe at the beginning, especially, was kind of migration blind in terms of the fact that I was also kind of, I felt, I mean, I'm more connected to what Martina was saying. It was more a matter of language, but also some related, not just the language, but also kind of an embodied level of differences. And it was connected mostly for the way I was expressing, for example, my emotions, and the way I was using my body. And because Italian people, and English people and British people, they have a different, I think also people from South America maybe can relate. We have a different way of using the body. And this was something that I really felt. I mean, at the beginning, it was something that, you know, is not exactly a problem. I mean, because it also depends on the fact that I'm not very expansive as a person. I'm an introvert. So it was kind of at the beginning for me it was like, okay, that's fine. It's even better probably for some reason. But actually, I was feeling that. I mean, kind of the different way of approaching, the different way of relating to the other people. And there was a funny joke about the fact that people, for example, my neighbors, they always ask me, "How are you?" And I reply, and they actually sometimes they don't even, they just asking me for that, which is something strange for me. Was like something that really make me feel like now I'm in another country, and not just the weather. It's also these very small things that were just connected to the daily life, and something that they can sound kind of imperceptible. I would really love, actually, related to the comment from Sibel, I would really love to write a paper all together, because I think that because we also came from very different places, and we also can add something. And all these, I think, I really feel that being a migrant is like, even if the society where we live connects migration to exploitation and suffering and displacement and loss, I think we have to work and transform this idea into something that is more like it's richness. I mean, migration can bring richness. And I know this is a political thing more than just an academic and research related topic. We have questions.
Yes. And
okay.
Yes, I can give it a go if you want. They're asking about organizations. This is Bob Tonley. He's asking about organizations and the trauma of immigration. I can give it a go, and I think that this is something that Marcos, Martina, Derek can take rounds around it, because this is a very powerful question. As a disclaimer, my research is action research, and I tend to be more hands down. So in my institution, when we talk about immigration in the US, this is a conversation about legal, illegal, undocumented, and the sort. So in my institution, the way that we look at it in the recent years is we have, for example, a lawyer. So there's a lawyer who is full-time at the institution helping students to navigate immigration issues and visas. We have social workers who are helping students to look at issues of food security, housing. We have counselors to talk about psychological trauma, stress, and yet it's not enough. So we have this group helps students in all conditions. It's called CARE. And I don't remember even for what it stands, but it's a play on words for we care. And yes, we know that immigration brings trauma. We are being asked to socially conform, as Marco says, to enact different body language, to express differently. I remember myself as trying to say hi to people in Mexico. We kiss in the cheek to say hi. And I remember coming into the office, and there was the administrative assistant, and I come close to say hi. And before I realized, I was chasing the person around the desk because they were trying to get away from me. So there are funny stories that they only look funny in perspective. So institutions have an obligation, if they want to, as Martina mentioned, if they want to leverage, use, take advantage, or incorporate immigrant labor education into the workforce. And this is a process of transition. And I think that that's Marco better suited to talk about that. How do you socialize or integrate people, for example?
There is another question that I think that has just arrived from Elif Nurduman Kogan. Sorry if I made any mistakes in reading that. Thank you very much for organizing this brilliant event. Vijayta, when analyzing intersectional experience of a migrant, you said that one identity becomes silent in some cases. If one identity becomes dominant in refugee experience, okay. among class, gender, religion, refugee status, etc. How intersectionality led us to examine this silent category, except the given methods such as intra-category methods. I think that this is a question that both you, Vijay, and also Martina can add your knowledge, and then you can provide an answer to this.
Martina, do you want to go ahead?
I can go ahead, but I'd like to clarification first, because I think, Vijayta, that you said salient rather than silent identity, and that rather changes the meaning of it. The one's identity becoming salient, and that's how I understand this as well, which is exactly the opposite of that. Okay, so Elif says she meant salient. Fair enough, fair enough. So thank you for clarification. That's the language thing that we've been talking about, which is exactly this. I guess we are having precisely that perfect illustration of that. This moment when we're all realizing here, we're migrant here, we are communicating in a language in which we are perfectly competent professionally, and yet there will be moments where we can so easily, I think, relate to the fact that we use words which we need to unpack a little bit to see actually what we mean. So that's where it becomes salient, I guess. I hope it suffices, because that illustration, and thank you, Eli, for helping me out so well at this moment. Vijayta, is there anything you wanted to add?
It's the same, Martina. And Aleph, maybe you meant salient. But yeah, so it doesn't like silent, it doesn't make the identity silent. That's not what I meant. What I meant was it becomes more salient, more obvious. And how intersectionality helps is it lets you bring in these multiple lenses of, be it a migrant identity, be it that of gender, be it that of class. And then, at least in my research, the way I'm looking at the data now, and when you look at the data using all these lenses, you understand the richness of it more than what you might have thought earlier. And that's why I was saying that how that might help. Looking at one phenomena from multiple lenses than one lens. I hope that answers your question, Elif.
So we have another question from Carlos. And Carlos asks, I'm thinking about all those workers we see or used to see at our workplace who work for cleaning companies. Most are immigrants who remain invisible to most academic and non-academic staff. Is anyone aware of any research related to them? If not, shouldn't we all start looking at what is so close to us and yet remain invisible? I think that there are many research. I think there are a lot of research in terms of like invisible workers, especially now in this moment, especially because of the pandemic. And there's a lot of research in terms of the invisible workers in the food sector and also in the key sector, actually, because the key professions are there's a high percentage of migrant workers. But also, for example, I was thinking if, for example, for Paulina, if she has, because I know that she studied this kind of worker in her research. So I think she wanted to add something on the matter.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Carlos, for your question. Yes, there's a lot of research being done on the workers that we were walking around but yet didn't see them. But I think that, of course, I mean, I absolutely agree that we need to understand what makes them invisible, why do we still render them invisible when we know they're there. Yet the very powerful thing about invisible workers is that the moment they stop doing their job, we will immediately notice. So that's a very important contradiction there. And yes, there's a lot of research on that area. Sadly, right now I don't remember the authors, but I'm happy to share them with you. I've seen you on Twitter, so I'll send you some links. Thank you.
So I don't think we have any other questions right now. So I think we might think about closing this session. First thing, I want to thank you, all of you that participate to this webinar. Thank you to Martina, Paulina, Vijay, Arturo for your beautiful words, for your beautiful experiences, and thank you so much for this. Thank you, CMS, for giving us the chances to organize again this meeting, which was a beautiful experience. And now I think that Vijay wants to say something in closure about our future as a group.
Right, Marco. Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, everybody, including all the participants, for really making today's discussion so meaningful. Like I was talking about Padlet, and even the questions that you have asked, what we really think is that it has brought in that fluidity we were wanting to have in our discussions today. So thank you so much for making that possible, for your engagement. Possibly this partly answers Saibal's question as well. So going forward, we would encourage you to engage with us, and there are various ways in which you could do, possibly Padlet, possibly directly emailing us. At the same time, we are really glad to share with you that as a team, we would be having a sub-theme in the ICMS International CMS Conference, which is about to happen in December in India. It's going to happen online. But on this very theme, we have our proposal accepted, and soon we'll send out the formal invitation on various platforms. But we are really happy to be sharing with you that's the platform where we can further engage with each other, and possibly various collaborations would happen. I mean, that's we think is an exciting opportunity for us to take this forward. So thank you so much. And as a CMS In Touch member, I would be really, I am grateful to my team members. Arturo is over here with us in the panel. Behind the scenes are Alex, Kat, Ozan, and Holly. Really grateful to them for all their support. Right, so thank you. Have a great day, evening, night. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kat. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much to all of you for such a fascinating webinar. And as Vijeta says, there will be a stream at the ICMS, and you'll be getting information on that in the various platforms and tweets and so on and so forth. So before we leave you, we just wanted to let you know about some upcoming In Touch events. So our next one is on the 20th of April, where we'll be seeing Martina again with her team to look at publishing critical work in management learning. And then we have a number of others leading, so publishing critical work in leadership and business ethics and organisation studies. Now we also have a number of webinars and workshops in the pipeline, but what we would say is, if you're interested in running an event like the one that we've heard today, please get in touch with us. I've put the Gmail account in the Gmail email address into the chat, so just get in touch with us. If you've got an idea and you want to bring together a group, we can help connect you with various academics across the world who think in similar exciting ways as you, so just get in touch with us. And finally, if you want to watch the past videos, you can go to our YouTube site, and again the address for that is in the chat. In the meantime, it just leaves me to say thank you so much to all the panel and to Marco and Vijeta for organising today, and hope this finds you all well, and we'll see you soon for our next event on the 20th of April. Take care and bye now.